He created the trap not because he wanted glory or revenge, but because war had taught him its most terrifying rule. If you do not control the space controls you. And when the first screams tore through the silence between the ruined buildings, he understood that the line had already been crossed, because now there would be no heroes in this story, only consequences. "You've gone mad," his partner whispered to him the day before, watching his cold, focused movements. "One mistake, and this will bury us together with those who do not even understand where they have walked into." He did not answer right away, because he knew that any words would be a lie, since the truth is hard to say out loud when it sounds like a sentence. And only after a long pause did he speak evenly, without emotion, as if reading a list of the dead. "There is no right choice here. There is only the one after which the enemy does not come back for others, and if for that I must become the one they later call a monster, I will accept it without excuses." When the trap was triggered, there was no explosion and no triumph. There was silence, heavy, suffocating, filled with the realization that 40 people were now looking at him with eyes in which fear was quickly turning into rage, because the worst thing is not to be defeated, but to understand that you have been outplayed. "You think this is the end?" one of the captives shouted, his voice trembling with hatred. "You think you control us, but you have only opened the door to what will break you first." He stood silently, feeling how every word struck harder than a bullet, because he knew that now he was responsible not only for their lives, but also for what he had done to himself. And in this responsibility there was no place for heroism, only cold necessity. "You are alive," he finally said, and there was no threat in his voice, only weary firmness. "And you will remain alive if you understand one thing. This trap was created not for revenge, but to stop, because war ends not when someone shouts louder, but when someone takes upon themselves the weight of a decision." 40 gazes fixed on him at once, and in that moment he felt the tension become almost physical, because now every second could turn this situation either into a chance or into a mass grave. And he clearly realized that the trap was only the beginning, and that the real battle would begin when he had to answer the question that war always asks without warning. "How many of you are ready to die to prove that you are right?" he asked quietly, looking into the darkness between them. "And how many are ready to live, knowing that today you were stopped by a man who no longer believes in beautiful words?" And he did not yet know that this night would make him neither a soldier nor an executioner, but a witness to how quickly war forces a person to become a trap for others, even when they swear they are doing it for life. Time inside the trap began to warp almost immediately, because 40 people locked within a single space of fear create pressure heavier than concrete, and he felt it physically, in his chest, in his temples, in his hands that held the weapon not as a symbol of power, but as the last line between control and slaughter. "You think you are holding us?" one of the captives said slowly, with a hatred too calm to be safe. "But in reality, you have simply locked yourself in with 40 reasons why this will end badly, because people with nothing left to lose do not negotiate. They wait for a mistake." He looked at them and saw not enemies, but a chain reaction, where a single scream could tear everything apart. And that was precisely why he answered not with a threat, but with the cold truth that is hated most of all in war. "The mistake has already happened," he said dully, and there were no excuses in those words. "It began long before this trap, long before you and me, and if you are looking for the moment when everything went wrong, then you are standing inside it right now." His partner stepped closer, half whispering, but loud enough for the captives to hear every syllable, because silence itself was also a tool of pressure. "We cannot hold them for long," he said with tension bordering on panic. "People outside will realize what has happened here, and then they will not ask who is right. They will simply erase everything at once. That is exactly why they are still alive," he replied without taking his eyes off the captives. "The dead do not stop artillery, but the living force people to think, And if someone up there is still capable of thinking, then every minute here is working in our favor." A dull murmur rolled through the crowd. Not a scream, not panic, but something worse. The collective realization that they had become part of a calculation, and one of the men broke forward, his eyes burning as if he had already decided to die. "You are using us as a shield," he shouted, and in that shout there was not weakness, but defiance. "You are no better than those you are fighting against. You have just learned to call it necessity." He felt those words strike directly at the mark, because the most terrifying thing in war is not accusations, but their fairness. And he answered slowly, heavily, as if each word cost him years of life. "I am not better," he said, and there was no relief in that honesty. "But the difference is that I am still trying to stop what you call normal. Because if I release you today, tomorrow there will be 10 such traps, and in them there will no longer be someone who still doubts." 40 gazes fixed on him again, and in that moment he understood that the trap was not held by metal or concrete, but by fear and hope at the same time, because as long as they believed they could survive, they listened, and as long as they listened, the war outside this place was forced to wait. "You want to know how this ends?" he added quietly, but so that the words spread like a blade. "Either with negotiations that save more lives than any offensive, or with silence, after which there will be no one left to ask questions about who was right." And it was in this silence, filled with anger, fear, and forced waiting, that he felt the second act of this story was only beginning. Because the real choice had not yet been made, and war never leaves a person with only one path. It only forces them to pay for everyone. The tension began to crack from within, like metal heated for too long, and he felt it through his skin, because 40 people were no longer a crowd. They had become separate voices, separate fears, separate decisions that could collide in a single moment and tear the space apart. "You think you still control the situation?" One of the captives spoke, his voice low, composed, dangerously calm. "But you are missing the main thing, because while you look at us as a mass, among us there are already those who are ready to go first, even if it means death for everyone." He raised his gaze and met the man's eyes, and in that second he understood that before him stood neither a soldier nor a fanatic, but a man who had made a decision, and such decisions in war kill faster than weapons. "If you think I am not counting people like you," he replied slowly, each word heavy, "then you are mistaken, because this trap was not created for the weak, but for those who believe themselves ready to die for an idea without asking how many others will die with them." His partner intervened sharply, almost shouting, because the situation was slipping out of control, and panic burst through his voice, no longer possible to hide. "They are moving," he said, glancing around. "I see them passing signals, making arrangements, and if something goes wrong now, we will not have time to do anything." He raised his hand, stopping him not with a gesture of power, but with the gesture of a man who realized that holding back was now more dangerous than letting people speak, and he addressed the captives loudly, sharply, with a tension that cut through the air. "I see every one of your movements," he said, "and I know that among you there are those who want to provoke an ending simply to prove that fear is weakness. But listen carefully. In this trap, the first to die will not be the one who shouts, but the one who makes others believe there is no way out." A wave of noise rolled through the captives. Some shouted, some demanded water, some prayed, and this chaotic mixture of emotions became more dangerous than any assault, because it signaled the loss of the one shared state: waiting. "You are playing with us," someone from the crowd shouted, the voice breaking into hysterical rage. "You are dragging this out because you are afraid to decide, because you know that any decision will make you guilty." He did not deny it, because it was true, and truth in this situation was a weapon sharper than lies. "I am afraid," he said openly, and with that confession the room went dead silent, "because every minute here is 40 lives in my hands, and if you think I do not feel that, then you confuse coldness with indifference. Silence fell abruptly, almost painfully, because fear spoken aloud stops being one-sided. And now they were all inside the same space of responsibility, with no way to hide behind roles. "But remember this," he added, his voice growing firmer. "If any of you decides to break this trap with blood, I will do everything to make that blood the last this war spills in this place, even if it means I stay here with you." At that moment, a dull rumble came from outside, distant but clear, the sound of machinery approaching, and everyone understood that time was tightening to its limit, because now the trap held not only the captives, but its creator as well. And the third act ended not with an explosion, but with the worst realization of all. The decision would have to be made right now, with no right to error. The external rumble was growing closer, heavier, impossible to ignore now, and he felt how the trap he had built for others was slowly closing around himself. Because in war, any control lives only until a force appears that is indifferent to your calculations. "They are coming," his partner said hoarsely, almost in despair. "And if this is not negotiations, then they will simply erase us along with these walls, along with the people, along with your right words that no one will need after the first explosion." He did not answer immediately, because he was looking at the captives and seeing how fear in their eyes was turning into something worse than panic. Readiness, because when a person believes the end is inevitable, they begin to justify any cruelty as a last chance. "Listen to me carefully," he spoke loudly, his voice stretched tight like wire before snapping. "Those who are coming now do not see people here. They see coordinates. And if we do not break this scenario right now, then in a few minutes you will stop being hostages and become statistics." One of the captives stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, as if challenging not only him but death itself, and there was no hysteria in his voice, only contemptuous clarity. "You want us to believe you?" he said. "After everything that happened, after you drove us in here, you want us to calmly wait while those outside decide whether we are worth killing." He held the man's gaze and answered without shouting, without threats, with the same harsh honesty that was all he had left instead of faith. "I am not asking for trust," he said. "I am offering a choice, and that choice is brutally simple. Either you listen to me now and we force those who are coming to stop, or you take a step forward, provoke a shot, and then this trap becomes a mass grave where there will be no one who was right." His partner grabbed his shoulder sharply, his voice breaking because fear had nowhere left to hide. "Do you realize you are putting everything on a single sentence?" he whispered. "If they do not listen, we will have no second move. In war, second moves are invented by those who have never been in a trap." He answered just as quietly, "And I created this one precisely because I know how quickly alternatives disappear." He took a step toward the captives, as openly as possible, without holding his weapon ready, and that gesture was more dangerous than any threat, because now any of them could kill him first. "I am staying here," he said, looking at all of them at once. "If an assault begins, I will die together with you. And this is not heroism. It is proof to those outside that this is not a combat position, but a knot that can be untied, but only if all of us stop playing roles." The silence became deafening, because for the first time responsibility fell on everyone at once, and in that silence he understood that the finale was close, because either someone would break this tension with a word, or it would tear itself apart with blood. And the fourth act ended on the edge where any movement was already a decision. He stood in the middle of the trap without his weapon at the ready, and in that moment he understood that war never asks who is right. It only tests who is willing to remain human when all roles have already burned away, and that test was more terrifying than any assault. "If they open fire," he said evenly, but in a way that cut the air with every word, "they will be firing not at enemies, but at 40 living people, and at me, together with them. And then no one outside will be able to say they did not know, because we did everything to prevent this." The captives were silent, But this silence was no longer chaos. Something new appeared in it, heavy, like a shared realization that what was being decided now was not the outcome of an operation, but whether this war still had any boundary left that had not yet been crossed. "You think your death will change something?" The same man spoke, whose voice had sounded throughout the entire night. "You think that if you fall here, they will stop." He looked at him for a long time, without anger, without fear, and answered as if he were saying this first of all to himself. "I do not think," he said. "I know that if everyone dies here today, tomorrow this war will continue as if you had never existed. But if we force it to stop even for 1 hour, that hour will save more lives than any shot." A command sounded from outside, loud and sharp, and in that second the air tightened to the point of pain, because everyone understood that time was over, and it was then that he raised his hands higher, deliberately, without gestures of heroism, only with cold determination. "There are 40 living hostages here and me with them," he shouted into the emptiness beyond the walls. "And if you want to end this war with one more number in a report, then do it now. But if you are capable of hearing, then order a halt." Seconds stretched like years, and in that pause he felt how the trap had finally changed its master, because now it was holding not people, but the war itself, forcing it to look at itself without excuses. "Stand down." Finally came the voice from outside, dull, almost disbelieving. "Prepare negotiations." Someone among the captives fell to their knees, someone cried, someone laughed hysterically, and in this broken chorus of emotions he stood silently, feeling not relief, but weight, because he understood that after this night he would never again be able to call himself just a soldier. "You saved us," someone said quietly, almost in disbelief. He slowly shook his head, and there was no modesty in that gesture, only truth. "No," he replied. "I simply did not allow the war to take 40 more lives as if they meant nothing." When the trap was opened and people stepped outside, the dawn felt foreign, because the world had not become brighter. It had simply continued to exist, and that was the hardest realization of all, because heroism does not change war. It only sometimes prevents it from devouring everything at once. And when he was left alone among the ruined walls, he understood that he had created not a trap for the enemy, but a boundary he himself had refused to cross, and that the true victory in this story lay not in the 40 lives saved, but in the fact that he proved that even in the darkest war, someone can say, "Enough," and remain human.